It was late evening, and the sky was covered with dark clouds. The air smelled of rain, and the streetlights flickered in the cold wind. A young girl walked alone along the narrow road, holding her old umbrella that kept shaking in the wind. Life had not been easy for her. She had lost her parents when she was very small and had grown up in an orphanage. Now, she worked part-time in a small cafe, earning just enough to pay for a tiny rented room and her evening classes. That night, she was tired. Her clothes were damp from the drizzle, and her shoes made a squishing sound with every step. She dreamed of a better future, maybe a day when she wouldn't have to count every coin before buying food. But life had taught her not to expect too much. As she walked, a sudden loud crash broke the silence. It was the kind of sound that made your heart stop for a second, the sound of metal crushing against metal. She froze. For a moment, she thought it might be thunder. But then she heard something else. A man's faint cry for help. Her heart started pounding. Without thinking twice, she ran toward the sound. Her feet splashed through the puddles as she hurried down the road, the cold wind biting her face. When she reached the spot, her eyes widened in shock. A car had crashed into a tree. The front was smashed badly, steam rising from the broken hood. One of the headlights blinked weakly in the darkness. Inside, she saw an old man leaning against the seat, his head bleeding slightly. He looked weak. Struggling to stay awake, the girl's mind raced. She had never been in such a situation before. Fear tried to creep in, telling her to wait for someone else, anyone else, to come and help. But the road was empty. Cars passed sometimes on the main highway, but this side road was quiet, almost deserted at night. She ran closer. "Sir, can you hear me?" She shouted, her voice shaking. The old man moved his hand weakly, but he couldn't speak properly. She pulled at the door handle, but it was stuck. The metal was bent from the crash. For a moment, she felt helpless. Then she remembered the small rock she had seen near the sidewalk. She grabbed it, broke the window carefully, and reached in to unlock the door. Her hands trembled as she helped the man out, supporting his weight on her small shoulders. He was much heavier than she expected, and she almost fell when he leaned on her. The smell of smoke from the car scared her even more. She had seen in movies how cars sometimes caught fire after crashes. She didn't want to think about what could happen if they stayed too close. Slowly, step by step, she guided him to a safe spot under a tree, away from the road. The man groaned softly, his eyes half open, looking at her as if trying to remember her face. She kept talking to him, telling him to stay awake, that help was coming. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and felt cold under the bright white lights. The girl sat on a hard bench near the emergency room, her clothes still damp from the rain. She had no idea what time it was. Her hair clung to her face, and her hands were numb from the cold night air. But she didn't care. She only wanted to know if the old man would survive. Through the small glass window of the emergency room door, she saw doctors and nurses working quickly around him. One nurse came out briefly, carrying used bandages, and the girl quickly asked, "Will he be okay?" The nurse gave her a kind look. "He has some injuries, but he's strong. He'll be all right. You saved him." The words made her heart feel lighter. She sat back, relief washing over her, though her legs still trembled from the adrenaline of the night. Minutes passed slowly. The hospital was mostly quiet at this late hour. A few tired faces waited in the hall, families of other patients, some dozing on benches. The girl sat alone, hugging her small bag close to her chest. She wondered why no one had come for the old man. Didn't he have family, friends, someone who cared? After what felt like forever, a doctor came out and said the man was stable now. He had a broken arm, a mild head injury, but nothing life-threatening. "You did the right thing bringing him in quickly," the doctor told her. She nodded silently, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. She had done something good tonight. A nurse came over and asked for her name to note down in the file. She told them, but she didn't ask anything else. She didn't want to be in the news or get involved in police reports. She was just glad. The man was safe. The nurse smiled softly at her. He asked for the girl who helped him. He wants to see you when he wakes up. The girl felt shy all of a sudden. She wasn't used to people wanting to meet her. In her life, most people forgot her face as soon as she left a room. When the nurse left, she thought about going home. It was already midnight. She had work early in the morning, and her landlord would scold her if she came late again. But then, she remembered how the man had looked at her before losing consciousness. She couldn't just leave without knowing if he wanted to say something. So she waited. After half an hour, a nurse came and told her the man was awake. He was in a private room now. The girl walked slowly toward it, unsure what to say. Inside, the old man looked pale but better. His arm was in a cast, and there was a bandage on his forehead. When he saw her, his tired eyes softened. "You saved me," he said in a weak voice. She shook her head quickly. "I just helped," she replied. Quietly, "What's your name?" He asked again, as if trying to memorize it this time. She told him. He repeated it softly, then smiled faintly. "You have a kind heart," he whispered before closing his eyes again. Exhausted. She stood there for a moment, not knowing what else to say. She didn't want to bother him. So she quietly left the room and told the nurse she was going home. As she stepped out of the hospital, the rain had stopped. The air felt fresher, cooler. She walked back slowly, the events of the night replaying in her mind. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't ask his name or anything about his life. To her, he was just someone who needed help. She didn't expect to see him again, but as she disappeared into the dark streets, the man in the hospital room was already asking his assistant to find the girl who had saved him. He didn't tell anyone why yet. He just knew he owed her something bigger than words. And the girl? She had no idea how much her life was about to change. Her phone had no credit left to make calls, but she waved frantically when she saw headlights in the distance. A motorcyclist stopped, and she begged him to call an ambulance. The man quickly dialed the number and explained the location. While waiting, she tore a piece of cloth from her scarf and pressed it gently against the man's head to stop the bleeding. Her hands were cold, but she tried to smile reassuringly. At him, "It's going to be okay. Help is coming," she said softly, though inside she was shaking. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the sound of the ambulance siren filled the air. Relief washed over her as the paramedics rushed to help. They lifted the man onto a stretcher, checking his pulse and giving him first aid. One of them asked her, "Are you family?" She shook her head. "No. I just found him," she said quietly. They told her she could ride with them if she wanted. She hesitated for a moment. She had no money for transport back, but something inside told her she couldn't just leave. So she climbed into the ambulance, sitting silently in a corner as they sped toward the hospital. The old man opened his eyes once, just before they reached the hospital. His lips moved slightly, asking for her name. She told him softly, and he closed his eyes again, holding onto her hand weakly as if it gave him some comfort. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care about that. All she knew was that she couldn't have walked away that night. The next morning, the girl woke up late. Her alarm had rung twice before she finally dragged herself out of bed. Her body ached from the long night, and her eyes felt heavy, but she had no time to rest. She quickly washed her face with cold water, tied her hair back, and put on the same faded sweater she wore almost every day. She had work at the cafe, and her boss didn't like excuses. Last night's accident still played in her mind like a movie. The old man's weak smile, his quiet words, "You saved me." She felt a little strange thinking about it. She had someone's life, but then life quickly reminded her. She still had bills to pay, rent due, and only a few coins left in her purse. She walked to work, the morning air cool but bright after the storm. As she crossed the street, she noticed a newspaper stand. The headline caught her eye. Mysterious young girl rescues elderly man in night crash. She froze. Right below it was a photo of the smashed car and the hospital entrance. Her heart skipped a beat when she read the name of the man, Mr. William Carter, a billionaire businessman who owned several companies across the city. She blinked in surprise. A billionaire? The quiet old man she had helped last night was one of the richest men in the country? She shook her head and laughed softly to herself. Life was strange sometimes. She had helped him without even knowing his name, and now the whole city was talking about it. At the cafe, she worked as usual, wiping tables, taking orders, and serving customers. She didn't tell anyone about last night. She didn't want attention. But somewhere across town, in a luxurious hospital room, Mr. Carter was sitting up in bed with his assistant by his side. His face looked pale, but his eyes were sharp with determination. "Find her," he told the assistant firmly. The man hesitated. "Sir, the media is already searching. It might take time." Mr. Carter shook his head. "I don't care how long it takes. She saved my life. I need to see her again." He didn't explain why. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was because he had spent his whole life surrounded by people who only cared about his money, his power, his name. But this girl? She had no idea who he was and still risked her life to save him. That meant something to him. So while the girl cleaned dishes and served coffee to strangers, a quiet search began. Mr. Carter's staff visited hospitals, orphanages, and neighborhoods. They spoke to witnesses, the ambulance driver, even the motorcyclist who had called for help. Slowly, piece by piece, they began to gather information about the girl who had disappeared into the night. After saving a man she didn't know, days passed. The media continued to talk about the mystery rescuer. Some people claimed to have seen her, but the descriptions didn't match. The girl herself stayed busy with her work and evening classes. She didn't have time for newspapers or TV. One evening, as she left the cafe, she saw children crowded around a small shop window where a news channel was playing. The headline read, "Billionaire offers reward to find brave young girl who saved his life." Her heart skipped again. A reward? He was really looking for her. She bit her lip, unsure what to feel. She didn't want money or fame. She had only done what was right. But a small voice inside whispered, "Why would a billionaire want to meet someone like you?" She pushed the thought aside and walked home quickly. She had work early the next morning, but far away, Mr. Carter's men were getting closer. They had learned about a girl working in a small cafe near the accident site. A girl who had no family, no last name anyone remembered, living quietly in a rented room, attending evening classes when she could afford them. Mr. Carter smiled faintly when he heard this. "That has to be her," he said softly. And so the search narrowed, step by step, until it was only a matter of time before their paths would cross again. The girl didn't know it yet, but her simple act of kindness had already changed the course of her life. 2 days later, the girl was cleaning tables at the cafe when the bell above the door rang softly. She didn't look up right away. Customers came in all the time, but something about the sudden silence in the room made her pause. When she turned, she saw 2 well-dressed men in suits standing near the counter. They looked out of place in the small, modest cafe where most customers wore work uniforms or old jackets. One of them glanced around until his eyes landed on her. "Are you the girl who works here in the evenings?" he asked politely. She nodded slowly, unsure why they wanted to know. "The man you saved. He wants to meet you," the second man said with a small smile. Her heart jumped. The billionaire? He had actually found her? She didn't even know what to say. "We can take you to him," the first man continued. "He's been looking for you." She hesitated. The idea of meeting a billionaire in person felt strange, almost unreal. She wasn't used to important people wanting to see her. She was just a girl who worked in a cafe, who counted every coin before paying rent. But something inside told her to go. She quickly told her manager she had to leave early, grabbed her small bag, and followed the men outside. A black car with dark windows waited near the sidewalk. The seats were soft leather, and the air inside smelled faintly of expensive perfume. She sat nervously, her hands resting on her lap as the city passed by outside the windows. The car stopped in front of a massive mansion with tall iron gates. It looked like something from a movie. Shining windows, perfectly cut gardens, fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sun. She felt suddenly small walking up the long driveway, her old shoes making no sound on the smooth path. Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, paintings lined the walls, and the floor was polished so bright it reflected the lights above. She had never seen anything like it before. And then she saw him. Mr. Carter sat in large armchair near the window, his arms still in a cast but his face brighter, stronger. When he saw her, he smiled warmly, the kind of smile that made the room feel less intimidating. "You came," he said softly. She nodded, unsure what to say. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near him. She sat slowly, her heart beating fast. "I wanted to thank you," Mr. Carter said. "That night, you didn't know who I was. You didn't wait for a reward. You just saved me. Most people would have walked away." She shook her head. "I couldn't just leave you there. Anyone would have helped." He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many people don't stop to help strangers anymore." She looked down at her hands, unsure how to reply. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because it was right. Mr. Carter studied her quietly for a moment. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "I saw the news." He chuckled softly. "Yes, the news loves a story. But what they don't know is that you gave me more than just my life back. You reminded me there are still people who do good without expecting anything in return." She felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to such kind words. "I want to help you," he said suddenly. Her eyes widened. "Help me?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I've already asked about you. You work long hours, study when you can, and have no family to support you. You deserve a chance at a better life." She shook her head quickly. "I didn't help you for money," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "That's exactly why I want to help. Kindness should be rewarded, not ignored." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to refuse. She had lived her whole life without anyone giving her anything. But another part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was the chance she had always prayed for. Mr. Carter smiled. "Gently, think about it," he said. "You gave me my life back. Let me give you yours." The girl left the mansion that evening with her mind spinning. She didn't know what to expect next, but deep inside, she felt something was about to change forever. The girl didn't sleep much that night. She kept turning the words over in her mind. "Let me give you your life back." She wasn't used to kindness like this. Most of her life had been about survival, making sure she had food for the day, paying rent on time, staying out of trouble. She had never thought about big dreams because dreams cost money, and money was something she never had. The next morning, she returned to the cafe as usual. She served coffee, wiped tables, and smiled at customers, but inside she felt different. The memory of the mansion, the man's warm smile, the way he had spoken to her, it stayed with her like sunlight after a long winter. 3 days later, a car stopped outside the cafe again. The same men stepped in and told her Mr. Carter wanted to see her once more. This time, she didn't hesitate. Something inside told her this meeting would change everything. At the mansion, Mr. Carter greeted her with the same kind smile. He looked stronger now, the bandages mostly gone, his cast still on but his energy much brighter. "I've been thinking about you," he said as she sat down. "You saved my life. I want to give you a chance to live yours fully." She looked at him curiously. "I've set up a scholarship for you," he continued. "It will cover your education completely. College, living expenses, everything. You won't have to worry about money anymore." Her eyes widened in shock. "For me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said firmly. "You deserve it. You have courage, kindness, and strength. The world needs people like you to have opportunities, not struggles." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever done anything like this for her. She had always been the one helping others, serving coffee, carrying plates, cleaning floors, never expecting anything in return. "Why me?" she whispered finally. Mr. Carter smiled gently. "Because you helped a stranger when you had nothing to give except your heart. That's rare. And people like you deserve a chance to change the world." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face slightly, embarrassed, but Mr. Carter simply handed her a small envelope. Inside were papers confirming the scholarship and details of a small apartment near the college campus. "You don't have to live in that tiny room anymore," he said softly. "You'll have a safe place, close to your studies." She stared at the papers in disbelief. It felt like a dream she might wake up from any second, but it was real. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving one day to the next. She could study properly, maybe become a teacher or a nurse, something that would let her help others, just like she had helped him. Mr. Carter watched her quietly. In his long life, he had met many people who smiled at him only because of his money. But this girl was different. She reminded him of his younger self, before wealth and power had made life complicated. When she finally found her voice, she said, "Thank you. I don't even know how to say how much this means to me." He shook his head. "Just promise me one thing," he said. She looked at him curiously. "When life gives you more than you need, pass it on," he said with a faint smile. "Help someone else the way you helped me." She nodded slowly, her heart full. That evening, as she left the mansion, the city lights glowing softly around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Months later, she moved into her new apartment and started college. It was hard work, but this time she didn't have to skip meals or choose between paying rent and buying books. Mr. Carter kept in touch, sometimes visiting, sometimes just sending a message to ask how she was doing. One afternoon, after class, she sat on a bench watching the sunset. She thought about the night of the accident, how everything had changed because she had stopped to help a stranger. She realized that kindness was like a circle. What you gave often found its way back to you, sometimes in ways you could never imagine. And somewhere in the city, Mr. Carter smiled when he heard about her good grades and volunteer work at the local shelter. The girl who had once saved him was now helping others, carrying forward the very kindness that had changed her life. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage can open doors to a future brighter than you ever dreamed.